My daughter looked at me and said, "Dad, you'll eat after everyone else." Something split inside me. No anger, no shout, just a clean break like frost through old wood. The room didn't flinch. Laughter went on. Forks kept scraping. I lifted the brisket I'd tended for 8 hours, heat biting my palms, and walked out. No one moved. Not a word. The door closed, and all I heard was them eating. My name is Walter Green, 68, retired engineer, and that night I learned what it means to be erased by your own blood. What happened next changed everything. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I did not slam the door. I eased it until the latch clicked, the way a mechanic listens for a clean seal. Outside, the air felt cooler than it should have for a family dinner. Smoke curled off the foil and gathered around my wrists. The pan burned through the towel, and I shifted my grip careful like I used to be with hot metal in a shop where men learned patience or got burned. The porch light threw a tired circle across the cement. Nobody called my name. No chair scraped back. They never stopped chewing. The street had that end-of-day shine that makes the asphalt look wet even when it has not rained. I walked slowly because the meat would tear if I jolted it, and because a man should walk slowly when something breaks. I could still hear the dining room sounds through the brick tinny and far as if I had moved to the wrong side of a radio. I passed the hydrangea Melissa trimmed to the nub last spring. She said it made the yard modern. I said nothing then. I said nothing now. The foil hissed where the fat pooled, and I smelled pepper and smoke and the last of my patience. It is strange how a house looks different when you are leaving with the main course. The wreath on the door meant welcome last year. Tonight it meant inventory. Place settings, stemware, labels on bins in the pantry. My name was missing from all of it. I stepped off the porch, and the night met me with a small wind that lifted a corner of the foil. I pressed it down with the back of my hand and kept walking. I cooked for them all my life, and tonight I tasted my own silence. I thought of the morning how I woke at 4 without an alarm, how the old habit of tending a fire came back like muscle memory from the shop. Rub on the meat, steady the coals, and watch the temperature sit just right. 8 hours is a long time to ask a man to pay attention, but I have always been good at attention. It is what kept me from losing fingers. It is what kept our mortgage paid. It should have counted for something at a table I built. 3 houses down, the maple leaves chattered and the streetlight hummed. I shifted the pan and felt the weight in my forearms. People talk about the weight of years. I have found the weight of a thing you made is heavier. At the corner, a neighbor watered petunias. She raised a hand and then thought better of it. Maybe she thought I was bringing food across town. Maybe she saw my face and decided the kindest thing was to look away. If kindness can be not looking. By the time I reached my gate, my hands were numb from the heat. The latch stuck like it always does, and I nudged it with my hip. The yard on this side of the street still smelled like cut grass and lemon soap. I had polished the banister last week the way my wife used to slow circles until the wood shone. I set the pan on my kitchen counter and heard the relief of metal on laminate. No voice called from the hall. No one asked where the serving knife was. The clock on the wall counted in a steady beat I had not noticed in months. Tick-tock, breathing for the house. I served myself on the chipped plate with blue flowers around the rim because it seemed right to eat the good part from a thing that had lasted. The slice fell clean. The juice ran to the edge and I caught it with a spoon. I ate standing up at first. Old habit from shop lunches, one hand on the counter, one hand doing the work. Then I sat. I forced the chair to creak under my own decision to be there. The meat was tender the way time makes it, not the way shortcuts promise. It was exactly what I meant it to be. I chewed slowly and let each bite land. When the house is quiet, you can taste the effort. Salt, smoke, the sweetness the rub gives back only after hours. The window over the sink held a flat pane of dark, and my reflection in it looked like someone I knew from a long time ago. A man who used to come home smelling like oil and talk about torque and tolerances until the kids wandered away. Melissa learned early that neatness wins. She put labels on her world and stacked people where she liked them. Efficient is what they call it when it is done to strangers. Family calls it love, until one day you are asked to earn your chair. My phone sat on the edge of the counter with the screen turned down. I knew if I flipped it, I would see messages from group threads with cheerful punctuation and no space for what happened between lines. I did not need to see the time either. The clock told me enough. Food tastes different when no one is watching you eat. It is less about the judgment and more about the room you get to take up. I had been eating small for months. I had been walking softly in my own life. I washed the plate when I was finished, not because there would be a fight about dishes, but because the kitchen felt better if I contributed to its order. The water ran warm against skin still tight from the heat. A faint ring of smoke clung to my wrists and to the towel. I dried the plate and set it back on the shelf in the exact space where it fit. It is a simple relief to return something to its outline. I sat by the window and watched the street. A couple walked a dog that looked like a question mark. A bus stopped at the corner. I thought about the last time Melissa and I laughed at the same thing. It might have been when Clara was 8 and lost a tooth in a slice of watermelon and insisted the tooth fairy would pay extra for summer losses. Or maybe I am folding too much sweetness into the memory. It happens. A man wants to remember light. The mind turns down the uglier, dimmer switch on purpose. I told myself not to catalog every slight tonight. The easy thing is to make a ledger. The honest thing is to look at what allowed it. I moved into Melissa's house last fall because she said it would be easier. Bills, rides, doctors. She said the word easier like an engineer says margin of error. Precise, necessary. She did not ask if I wanted to keep doing small, hard things myself. The first day I handed her my spare keys. The second week I let her set up online access for a couple of accounts I did not like to type into anyway. The month after that, my name felt heavy to say at counters. It is clever how loss gets sold as convenience. I stood and pulled a notepad from the drawer by the fridge. I wrote down 3 things without thinking too much. Check the bank, find the binder, breathe. I did not call anyone. I did not add an explanation. The list was not about punishment. It was about making the floor level again. If you have ever repaired an old house, you know the first fix is not the prettiest one. It is the one that stops the sag. Wind pressed the screen and the kitchen light pushed a weak halo onto the back stoop. Somewhere across town they were clearing plates and scraping pans, and Melissa was telling someone a story about tradition. I could hear her cadence in my head. I admired that for years. How could she keep a room steady with a tone? It works until it works on you. I went to the sink and rinsed my hands again as if the smoke would leave if I asked it politely. It did not. The smell clung in that way smoke prefers things it has lived with for a while. I lifted my hands to my face and breathed through it. It smelled like last summer, and like my father, and like every Saturday I spent holding a lid and checking the fire. It smelled like pride. I did not cry. I did not speak. I just stood there long enough to know I would not be going back across the street tonight. When I finally turned off the light, the room kept a softer version of itself, shapes still where they belonged. I left the pan cooling on the stove because the house felt right with evidence of effort out in the open. In the hall, the old rug lifted a corner the way it always does, and I pressed it flat with my foot. In the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the building breathe. Older homes tell the truth when everyone else has gone quiet. A pipe settled. The wind moved through a crack I had always promised to fill. The clock in the kitchen carried on. If you are listening to me and you have eaten last at your own table, you already know the taste in my mouth. It is not anger. Anger burns quickly and leaves you empty. This is something steadier. It is like finding the level bubble dead center and realizing the cabinet never hung right. You can keep closing the door hard and pretending it latches, or you can get a screwdriver. The world will not thank you for the noise. Do it anyway. I lay back without turning on the television. No weather report, no late game. The smoke on my hands followed me into the dark, and I did not mind. In the morning, I would make coffee and look for the binder and write down account numbers I had let other people memorize. I would walk to the bank when the doors opened and ask for my own records. I would do it without a scene. I would do it the way you fix the machine that keeps the shop warm in winter, slowly, carefully, without leaving bolts on the floor for someone else to trip over. For now, I stared up at the ceiling and let the quiet settle into joints that have done their share of lifting. The last thing I heard before sleep was the sound of the house agreeing that I belonged where I was. Outside, the streetlight blinked once and steadied. The wind moved on. Somewhere a door closed. Not mine. The house still smelled like lemon polish and dust, the scent of a life put on pause. I stood in the entry a moment longer than necessary, letting my eyes adjust to the dim. The lamps here glow a little softer because no one rushes them. The carpet gave under my shoes like it remembered the shape of me. That was almost kind. I set my keys in the shallow dish by the door and felt the small clink sit in the air. The clock on the wall answered with its steady measure, not loud, just true. I did not turn on the television. Noise would have argued with the room. I walked the hallway slowly. Fingertips grazing frames hung too straight for a house this old. My wife used to hang things by feel and check them again at dusk when the walls tell the truth. Melissa had brought a level the last time she visited and announced that things were finally lined up. I did not correct her. There is a difference between level and right. The kitchen held the night the way good kitchens do, with the tidy aftermath of work. A clean sink. A folded towel. The pan is cooling on the stove like a small moon. I avoided it. My hands still held the story of heat and effort, and I did not want to read it again. I filled the kettle and set it on the old burner, surrendering a soft blue ring. Steam rose and thinned into the dark. The clock kept counting. The sound met my breath and they started sharing a rhythm. When you are alone, you begin to see the places where you stepped aside without meaning to. I saw them in small corners. The label maker is still in its box because I never could bring myself to put adhesive names on shelves. The phone list on the fridge was written in a neat square hand that is not mine. A checklist for air filters with months circled. I made that one proud at the time that I had not forgotten to care for the things that keep a house breathing. It was last fall when Melissa sat across from me at her dining table and laid out a plan so clean you could have eaten off it. Dad just let me handle things. It is easier that way. The way she said easier sounded like a fact more than a favor. I nodded because widowers nod. I nodded because I was tired of mail and forms and lines that move slowly at windows where your name is spoken softly as if it might bruise. I told myself it would be temporary. A bridge. Bridges take you somewhere until one day you find you have started living under them. The kettle clicked. I poured the water and watched it climb the grounds and settle. Coffee at night does not make sense, but sense is not the point. Warmth is. The first sip cut the edge off my chest. The second let my shoulders drop. I turned the kitchen chair a few inches toward the window the way I like it and sat with the cup held in both hands. The clock ticked and ticked. I imagined prying its frame open and shifting the minute hand back to where I had last felt unhurried. The room pulled me toward the drawer where I keep papers. Not dramatic papers. The slow ones that map a life. Warranties. A marriage certificate is soft at the folds. The title to a pickup I sold 3 summers ago. This house is not large. 2 bedrooms, a garage with more organization in it than any man needs at my age. The title to the house we used to live in, a manila folder stamped with our last name. Somewhere between grief and convenience, that folder disappeared from this drawer. Melissa had said she would file everything digitally. That word sounded safe, like a vault with a password and a guard that never sleeps. I opened the drawer anyway and found envelopes that felt heavier than paper. Receipts from the roof repair, a faded letter from a neighbor long gone, a church bulletin with my wife's name printed next to potluck cornbread, and beneath those, almost embarrassed to still be here, a blue folder with a crease down the middle from the day I shut it wrong. I slid it out, and the smell of old ink rose. Some smells tell the truth faster than people. The deed rested inside with our names printed in a font no one uses anymore. I read that line twice because my eyes did not trust what they wanted. Walter E. Green and Margaret E. Green. I touched the paper where my wife's name lived like a soft bell. There was no transfer to Melissa, no recorded change. There had been talk about it the year Margaret got sick, plans to simplify in case it never came the way we thought. Death arrived instead and pulled the need for simplification out from under us, not because the paperwork was done, but because I stopped looking at it. It should have made me angry. It did not. Something else moved through me. Relief, I think. I had not missed the boat entirely. I had stepped away from the dock and nodded at the people who said they would steer, but the hull was still tied where I left it. I closed my eyes and leaned back. The chair let out a soft complaint and then agreed to hold me. The clock ticked like it had been waiting to be heard. In my mind, I saw Melissa standing by her kitchen island with that efficient smile, hands resting on a stack of folders like a judge ready to read a verdict. Dad, relax. You do not need to worry about this stuff anymore. I had wanted to believe her because belief is lighter than thinking when you get to a certain age. Easier had sounded like mercy. Tonight it sounded like a carved path I never chose to walk. The coffee cooled, the room did not. Houses keep the temperatures of the people who build them. Ours keeps a workroom warmth. Not hot, not chilly, just a middle that lets you function. I stood and took the deed to the table and smoothed it. I set my palm on our names and counted to 5 without knowing why. There are rituals you invent at 2 a.m. that no one can explain to you. The front room called me through the archway with that hush of old carpet and heavier air. I clicked on a lamp with a shade that my wife had recovered twice. Light washed across the sideboard and found the small tin where I keep spare keys. Melissa had asked for a set last winter. It made sense at the time. Emergencies begin as what-ifs. They can also be licenses if you are not careful. I lifted the tin, took my copy, and set the tin back where it had been. I am not ready to change the locks. That is not where this begins. This begins with remembering what my name still unlocks. The clock in the hall joined the one in the kitchen, and my breath fell between them like a third metronome. I pulled the curtains open and let the night press its face to the glass. A cat moved along the fence line. Somewhere a late truck downshifted. This city has a way of quieting itself that feels like respect. You hear the last sounds finish what they were doing and settle. I felt my own edges do the same. I took a pen and wrote a list that looked different from the one by the fridge. Title remains in my name. Confirm with the county records. Bring ID. Ask about certified copies. The lines did not shake. I have signed for machines worth more than this house and for paychecks that fed children who barely remembered what kept them fed. I can sign for myself again. I am not asking anyone to stand beside me at a counter and translate my life. On the way back to the kitchen, I paused at the clock and listened on purpose. Tick. The seconds went where they always go. Not lost. Spent. I have spent too many of them nodding while someone else announced the schedule. There is a cost to surrendering decision-making that no one warns you about. It is not money. It is the way your hand forgets the shape of a pen. I rinsed the cup and set it upside down on the drying mat. The kettle's metal cooled with a soft ping. The stove light cast a thin stripe across the floorboards and made them look like a road. I followed it to the doorway and stood there until the stripe faded. Somewhere a bird dreamed out loud. Morning is a rumor long before it shows up. I took the blue folder to the bedroom and slid it into the top drawer of the nightstand, not hiding, keeping near. The deed settled against the wood with a whisper. The house shifted once as if it had exhaled too. I lay down and pulled the blanket to my chest. The lemon polish smell drifted in from the hall and met the dust of untouched corners. The clock kept time with my breathing until the two were nearly the same sound. The last picture in my head before sleep found me was not Melissa's face or the folder or the kitchen chair turned just so. It was a worn metal ruler from the shop with numbers rubbed pale where my thumb had traced them for years. The rule was never argued. It only told me where the line fell. In the morning I would measure again. Not lumber, not steel, just the distance between my name and my life. It is not far once you spot it. The light will help. It always does. At sunrise, I reset every password she once helped me make. The light came in thin and straight across the kitchen table, turning the dust into a slow river. I brought the old laptop out of its drawer, wiped a fingertip across the lid, and felt a kind of steadiness I had not felt in months. The machine took its time waking up. That was fine. I was not racing anyone anymore. The first page that greeted me asked for a code I had not typed in years. My hands remembered the rhythm before my head did. 4 numbers, 2 letters, the initials my wife teased me about choosing. The browser opened with a row of tidy bookmarks that were not mine. Someone thought they were doing me a favor. I moved past them. A blank tab felt better. The cursor blinked patient as a nurse waiting for me to speak. I started with the easy ones. Email, utilities. Then I went to the places where money lives. Reset link security. Questioned the street where I grew up, the first car I owned, the name of the dog that slept under our dining table for 13 years. Each answer came with a thud of recognition. Every successful change was a small bolt tightened. The new passwords I made were ugly on purpose. Functional, not poetic. My fingers hit enter and the system agreed to see me. In the hall, the clock kept its same stubborn count. I matched its cadence and did not let my thoughts outrun my hands. Inside the first account, the dashboard looked busy, all charts and friendliness. I went straight to statements. It is remarkable how much noise there is around a simple ledger. Click. Download. Another month. Click. I stacked them in a folder marked with today's date, and only when I had a small pile did I let my eyes go line by line. There it was, neat as a grocery list. A recurring transfer on the 15th to an account ending in numbers I did not recognize. The description used soft words, a household contribution, the kind of phrase that passes for kindness on paper. I scrolled back. It had been there for months. The number was not large enough to be scandalous, only regular enough to become invisible. I felt a lift behind my ribs, not fury, more like the push a man gives a heavy door when he knows it will give if he leans right. I checked the next account. The same pattern, different labels. A rideshare balance that did not fit how I move through the world. A school fee note with my name attached to something I had not been asked to bless. Small numbers can teach bad habits. I opened the third account and found a polite line item for home services, monthly, clean, dependable, and entirely unsigned by me. I let my hands rest on the table until the tinny hum of the laptop fan settled. I did not rehearse a speech. I made a call. The wait music was too cheerful for the hour, but the voice that came on was steady. They announced the name of the bank and asked how they could help. I said my name and told them I needed to review who had permissions on my profiles. There was a pause while keys tapped on their end. They said they saw an authorized user with limited access and asked if that was correct. I said it would not be correct by the end of this call. Remove all authorized users, I said, and flag the accounts so no one can add themselves back without my in-person approval. They asked for verification. I answered each question without reaching for a scrap of paper. When they told me the changes had been made, I asked them to read the settings back to me slowly. They did. The words sat clean in the air. I thanked them, and before I hung up, I asked for a record of the request to be emailed and mailed. Belt and suspenders, I said, and the agent laughed softly and said her grandfather used to say that too. When the line clicked off, the room felt larger. I opened the printer drawer and found a half sleeve of paper. Good enough. The first statement fed through and out came the quiet proof of what my eyes had seen on the screen. I printed the summary page of each account and the confirmation emails as they landed. The printer light blinked an orange warning I had not seen in a long time. Low ink. I held the page up to the window to let the morning finish the faint lines. It did. The binder on the bookshelf beside the table was empty except for a plastic pocket with a dried-up pen. I set the fresh stack inside and ran my palm over the cover. The binder felt like a hinge with nothing on either side yet. I would fill it. Not to make a wall, to make a map. I slid the pen out, tried it, and put it back. It would write after it had a little patience and a little pressure. Some things still come back if you ask the right way. I opened a new page in the browser and signed into the county's site. The search window looked like it had been built in an era when websites were honest about being tools. I typed my address and waited. A line appeared with my parcel number and the last recorded deed. The names were the same as the paper on my nightstand. No recent transfers, no pending changes. The site offered me a certified copy for a fee. I filled the form, typed the new card digits slowly, and double-checked the shipping address. When it said the copy would arrive in 7 to 10 days, I nodded at the screen as if we had shaken hands. The letters on the keyboard picked up a little warmth from my hands. I realized I had been leaning in shoulders forward like I did at the bench when a measurement mattered and the rest of the line needed me to get it right. I sat back and let my spine find the chair again. The sun had shifted from thin to honest, throwing a rectangle of light onto the floor by the pantry. I wanted to stand in it, but I stayed where the work was. I called the second institution. A different melody held me for a minute, and then another voice introduced itself. We went through the same dance identity, last deposits, and security prompts. I kept my tone even. A tone. No apologies, no anger, just a correction. The agent read off a list of connected services and asked what I wanted to keep. None, I said, if I did not sign for it personally. They offered to leave ride credits in case I needed them. I said I own shoes. We both smiled into the receiver and finished the formality. Before hanging up, I repeated the words "flag" for unauthorized access to myself and asked them to confirm the note had been added. They said yes and read it back. Hearing it out loud felt like tightening the last screw. I drafted a short note to myself and printed that too. The paper slid out with a soft grind and a paler black than it should have been. Replace ink, it said at the top. Below it I wrote in pen, bring this binder to the branch for physical copies. Request stamped receipts. I do not need a parade. I need a counter, a stamp, and the sound of someone saying it is done. I closed the laptop gently and carried the binder to the counter next to the coffee maker. That spot has always been where things wait that deserve attention without drama. The machine exhaled a little heat into the room, and the quiet that followed was the good kind. I breathed through my nose and counted 4, 6, 8, until the pulse that had been living in my ears since last night obeyed. On the table, the low ink page caught the light again, and this time the faint numbers became readable. The transfers sat in a neat column the way a child would arrange toy soldiers, regular, obedient, facing the same direction. I slid my thumb along the edge, and they lifted as one stack. Evidence does not need to shout when it is organized. I thought about calling Melissa. The idea rose and sat, then went quiet. There is nothing to argue when the facts are this clean. A conversation now would only feed the part of her that loves to manage. I am not a project. I am a man with a first and last name and a life he still recognizes in the mirror. The house shifted the way wood does when it accepts the day. Boards said a few soft things to each other behind the walls. A truck on the avenue laid down a bass note and moved on. I moved too. I washed my face and changed my shirt and looked at my hands under the bathroom light. The faint smoke smell lived in the lines of my palms, a reminder without scolding. I let it stay. When I came back to the kitchen, the binder looked different, even though nothing had changed about its shape. A thing that holds your plans becomes a kind of backbone just by existing. I slid it into a tote with a firm bottom and set the tote by the door. The clock in the hall said it was still early. The branch would open soon. I would go in person for the pieces the internet cannot provide, the stamp, the human witness, the copy with a watermark that feels like a seal of weather. I stood in the doorway and let the morning sit on my shoulders. This is how a man learns himself again. Not by speeches. Not by revenge dressed up like righteousness. By the small insistence of doing the next right thing with his own hands. I lifted the tote and felt the weight of paper press into the fabric. Not heavy. Present. I turned off the lamp, checked the stove, and laid my palm on the binder one more time before I stepped outside. It was cool out. The printer's orange light still blinked in the dark behind me, a faint heartbeat telling me where the trail began. They still called me Mr. Green, but this time they meant it. The lobby smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and ink. A weekday morning hum ran through the room, low and steady, a sound that lets people get things done. I stepped to the counter with the tote on my shoulder and the binder resting against my ribs like a quiet engine. A young teller looked up and straightened without the automatic cheer people save for customers they planned to move along. "Good morning, Mr. Green. How can we help?" My voice surprised me with how level it came out. "I am here to put my accounts back in my own hands." They moved me to a small desk off to the side, glass partition, muted light, and a plant that had decided to keep living. The associate introduced himself, then asked for ID. I slid it across and kept my palm on the binder. He typed and nodded. "I see your profiles. What would you like to do today?" "Remove every authorized user. End every recurring transfer I did not set up myself. Lock the doors you can lock from your side." He asked a series of questions that felt like stepping stones across a creek. Last deposit amount. The branch where the account was opened. The year I refinanced the mortgage we no longer carried. I answered without reaching for the folder. Confidence does not have to be loud to be complete. He nodded again more slowly, this time eyes on the screen. "We can remove the authorized user. Do you want to block online access for family members? Family or not, security is security." He paused, then looked at me directly instead of at the monitor. "There is another option we recommend in situations where access has been a habit. We can flag the account for unauthorized reactivation. Any attempt to re-add a user or reinstate transfers without you sitting here will trip an internal hold." My hand found the pen in my shirt pocket before my mind did. I felt the weight of it, the truth of a tool you trust. Yes, permanently. He turned the screen slightly so I could see the fields populate. The clicks sounded different after that sentence. Each one landed. He canceled a line of transfers labeled in friendly language and read back the confirmation. The rhythm became familiar. Remove. Confirm. Annotate. He moved to the next account and the next. He did not rush. I did not either. The room felt like it had narrowed to the width of the desk and the distance between two pairs of hands doing a tidy job. A supervisor came over with a form on a stiff board. He asked me to review the summary in print. He pointed with a pen and kept his own voice even. This is the record of permissions removed, recurring activity canceled, and the fraud flag we just added. Initial here and here, then sign at the bottom. He set a plastic pen by my hand. I slid it away and took out my fountain pen. The cap turned with a small thread of sound that felt like memory waking up. The nib met the paper, and the line held straight and sure. The signature looked like mine again, not the tired scribble I had come to accept at counters where I wanted to get out of the way. A man leaves part of himself in his name. Sometimes he needs to see it to believe he is still in there. The associate glanced at the pen and smiled without trying to make conversation. We will attach your signed request to the profile so any employee who opens it sees your instructions before they see anything else. His words were a kind of respect you cannot script. He printed stamped confirmations, ink still damp in the corners. I watched each sheet arrive and stack. The printer thudded out one more page and then blinked to tell us it needed a new cartridge. The supervisor sighed and replaced it with the ease of someone who does it twice a week. The new ink came out clean and dark. We went over the language one last time. I asked him to read the flag note back to me slowly. He did. Any online or in-person attempt to add or restore external access triggers a manual hold pending review with the primary holder Walter E. Green present. I felt the knot in my chest loosen a click I could almost hear. "Thank you," I said, and meant the whole sentence. He slid a business card across the desk and said, "If anyone calls claiming to be me and says the flag is a mistake, we will call you on this number before we even breathe." I nodded. "That will do." He folded the copies into a sturdy envelope and wrote my name across the front even though he did not need to. It looked good there. There was a final piece. He asked if I would like to set a branch-only note for large withdrawals, the kind that requires a live signature. My hand went back to the pen of its own accord. Yes. Make the threshold sensible. Leave me able to live. Keep me safe from surprise. He said it. Let me see it, and we both took a breath. The hum of the branch came back into focus. Printer's muted conversation, the door opening and closing with a polite whisper. He asked if there was anything else. I thought of the years I had spent picking up small messes before they turned into big ones the way you do in a shop to keep everyone's hands attached. Just one thing, I said. Mail a hard copy of the changes to the address on file. Email the same. I do not rely on only one kind of proof anymore. Belt and suspenders. He grinned. His grandfather must have told him something similar too. I stood, let the chair scrape back with a sound that belongs in places where paperwork matters, and gathered the envelope and binder. Something in my posture had shifted. Not taller, truer. The associate came around the desk instead of gesturing from behind it and shook my hand. "Good to meet you, Mr. Green." I returned the shake and found the right pressure without thinking. Good to be properly seen. The walk back across the lobby felt like the end of a shift. Not dramatic, not triumphant, simply complete. The glass door opened on a thin squeak and the day crept in. I stepped through and held the envelope against my side. The door closed behind me and briefly showed me my reflection, smaller than the world around it and standing straight anyway. Outside, the light was the color mornings use when they are ready to become afternoons. A bus sighed at the curb. Someone laughed into a phone. I took the envelope to the tote and let it settle against the binder. The corner of the paper pressed a small square into the cloth. Proof has a shape you can feel. On the sidewalk, I found a bench and sat for a minute with my hands quiet on my knees. The world did not care what I had just done, and that was a comfort. Dignity does not need an audience. A pigeon worked a crumb along the seam where the slabs of concrete meet. I listened for any leftover noise in my head and mostly heard air. I thought about calling Clara, not to report a victory, to tell her I had done the simple things a man must do to keep the roof over him honest. I decided to wait until evening. There is value in letting a deed rest without immediately making it a story. The binder would be there when I got home. The envelope would still say my name. The flag would sit inside the system invisible and firm. I stood and crossed the street, waited for the light like a citizen among others, then made my way toward the corner. A woman with a stroller nodded as we passed. The city smelled like warm concrete and a bakery 2 blocks over. I counted the steps to the bus stop and did not lose count. The tote rode against my hip like a good tool belt. Nothing flashy, just what I needed, where I needed it. When the bus arrived, I climbed the steps without the small apology I have learned to give my knees. I sat on the left side 3rd row where the window lets you see the storefronts and the sky in one frame. The envelope pressed against the binder and the binder pressed against me. I let my eyes rest on the reflection in the glass as the building slid by. A man with his name in his mouth and his back in line. That is enough for a morning. I pulled the cord at my stop and stepped down to the sidewalk I have worn in for decades. The air in my block always smells a little like cut grass even when no one is mowed. At my door I balanced the tote and reached for the handle. The metal felt familiar. The key turned. Inside the hallway the quiet held. I set the envelope and binder on the kitchen table and placed my pen beside them. The nib still glinted. A weapon that leaves no bruise except where it draws a straight line. The kettle would go on in a minute. The phone would stay face down. The day would continue without asking my permission. That was fine. A signature had done its work. The rest of me could follow. The glass door at the bank had closed with a soft insistence and kept my reflection for a heartbeat. I kept the shape it showed me and carried it across my threshold. Mr. Adler still kept my first will in a drawer, yellowed but intact. He slid it across the desk with the care you use when handling a photograph. The office smelled like lemon polish and old paper, the quiet kind of place where decisions keep their voices down. He had gone grayer since the last time I sat here, but his eyes held the same steady light. He asked how I had been, and I said enough to let us move forward. He nodded like a man who knows when to let the story arrive on its own. We did not rush. He read the dates, the names, the language a younger version of me agreed to when life looked different. The clauses sounded formal and distant, as if they had been written about a man I once knew rather than the one in this chair. He tapped one section with a finger and said, "This is where you left things 10 years ago. Does it still represent what you want?" I looked at the line with my wife's name and let my palm rest there for a breath. Then I told him what happened at dinner last night and what happened in my kitchen after. He listened without flinching, and when I finished he closed the old will and folded his hands. "This is not about anger," I said. "I am not here for punishment." He tilted his head a degree, inviting the word I had brought with me. "This is not revenge, Mr. Adler." "Then what is it?" "Correction." He opened a fresh legal pad and wrote the word in the margin like a title. "We will revise your will. We will place what you have where it belongs. Tell me who you trust." I said Clara's name and the room felt cleaner. He asked me to spell it anyway, not because he doubted me, but because he respects letters the way a machinist respects measurements. He drew a box around the name and moved to the details. Real property accounts and personal items that matter beyond their price. I described the house, the savings I had watched, and the instruments that kept me company after the shop closed for good. He wrote without letting the pen tap. Then I said the thing that had brought me here as much as the will. "I want a living arrangement that keeps my estate out of the long hallway where strangers read the choices of dead men." He looked up and kept his voice even. "You want a trust?" "Yes. Living with me in charge while I am here, and Clara is set to receive what remains when I am not." He sat back a little and gave me a look that held something like approval. "That is decisive," he said. "Many people take months to circle that sentence. I said I had taken years, and that was enough circling for one lifetime." He opened a folder and pulled out a draft template he keeps for clients who are ready to stop leaving important things in the realm of later. We went through each section without hurry. Successor trustee. I said Clara, and he asked if there was anyone I wanted in line after her. I said no, because trust is not a group project. He asked about conditions, and I said only that she should be allowed to live and learn without someone holding her allowance over her head. He smiled with half his mouth and wrote discretionary with guidance from the principal. We came to the topic of powers I had granted when grief made convenience sound like mercy. Financial authority I had once handed to Melissa in the name of emergencies. He looked at me and did not have to ask. I said, make sure nothing out there points to her name and mine in the same line unless I am standing at the counter and saying yes. He wrote a revocation and asked if I wanted a copy delivered to her address once filed. I said deliver what the law requires and nothing that smells like a performance. He turned the pad to a fresh page. Health decisions. Do you have someone who will ask what you want before they tell you what you should want? The answer arrived without effort. Clara will listen. He nodded and said we can attach a directive that travels with the rest, clear-signed and reachable if a hospital decides to speak in its own language. He drafted in silence for a few minutes while I watched the light from the window slide across the desk like a slow river. He asked for my identification again and made copies for the file. The machine hummed a small tune while it worked. He arranged the stack and set it at my elbow. Here is what we have in motion. Revised will, trust documents, revocation of powers that no longer serve you. Health directive naming Clara. I read the top of each page, then let the weight of the paper speak. It felt like a tool in my hand rather than a story someone might argue with. We paused and he folded his glasses. Tell me if I am missing anything. I thought of the way Melissa arranges a room, how order can become a cage if you are not careful. I said write it plain enough that a clerk on a Friday afternoon can find the answer in one pass. He said I ask my staff to read these out loud for that exact reason. If the sentence stumbles in a mouth, it will likely stumble at a window. We do not make clerks guess. He placed a signature set in front of me and angled it so my hand would not cast a shadow. He laid a blotter under the first page as if the pen and paper deserved a clean field. The fountain pen in my pocket warmed against my shirt like a small animal remembering the sun. I took it out and the cap loosened with that thread of sound I have always liked. The nib touched the line and my name walked itself across with no wobble. The first stroke felt like stepping back into a pair of boots that have molded to you and finding they still know your gait. We worked our way through the places where my hand was required. Between signatures, he kept the room kind. He did not fill the quiet with advice I had not asked for. He only moved the next page into position and waited, while the window gave us enough light to see that the ink had set. At one point, he asked if I wanted water. I said I was all right. He let the moment pass. When it was done, he tapped the edges of the stack so they sat in an even pile. He slipped them into a sturdy folder, not the flimsy kind that collapses when a day goes wrong. He wrote my name on the tab, full, no initials. He said we will file what needs filing this afternoon. Copies will be sent to you and to the places that need to see them. Keep this folder where someone you trust can put a hand on it without searching. I told him where it would live, and he nodded. He said, tell Clara where that is in your own words. I said I would. He leaned back and let out a breath he had not been showing. Most people wait too long, he said, and then the corrections come after the damage, not before. Today you came before. I told him that last night taught me the cost of waiting for someone else to remember who you are. He did not smile, but his eyes did. He stood, and I stood with him. He offered his hand, and I met it with the pressure that says thank you without needing to say anything else. The pen made a soft clack as it seated into its cap. The window lay a bright square across the signing blotter, and the paper flashed white for a second before calming down to its usual tone. I tucked the folder under my arm, felt its edge find the place between my ribs and my elbow, and liked the way it fit. He walked me to the door, not because I needed help finding it, but because that is what people do when they understand the weight someone is carrying out. The hallway outside felt cooler, like the building wanted to remind me that there is a world after offices. I moved past the receptionist, who looked up and gave the kind of nod reserved for clients who have done something grown and final. The elevator arrived with a tone as soft as a throat clearing. I stepped in, pressed the button, and watched the numbers count in the right direction. The doors opened to the street, and the day met me with a brightness that had not been there when I came in. I walked without checking my phone. The folder rode against my side, and the city's sounds arranged themselves into something like a song. A delivery truck hissed at a red light. A sparrow hopped along a windowsill and decided the sun was worth trusting. I reached the corner and waited with two other people who had their own papers in their hands. The crosswalk sign changed and we all went forward at once. I did not look back at the building. There was nothing back there for me to second guess. On the way home, I let the weight of the folder tell me a simple truth. Fairness does not arrive as an apology from the person who forgot you. It arrives as the moment you put the pieces where they should have been all along and let the world adjust. The light hit the manila just so, and I saw my name again, clean and dark. That was enough. The documents were signed. The rest would be quiet work done by clerks and rooms without windows, and I was fine with that. Her name flashed on the screen, but I preferred the sound of the kettle. The ring pulsed against the countertop like a small alarm that did not belong in this room. Steam rose in a thin ribbon. The kettle began its soft growl, that low animal sound before the whistle, and I let it lead. The phone stopped. The kitchen kept breathing. I set the flame lower and watched the tiny shimmer that means the water is almost ready. Morning light had thinned to a quiet gray, the kind of light that lets a man collect himself. I reached for the mug that fits my hand best and felt a steadiness I recognized. Not the pride of victory, the steadiness of simple tools doing what they are meant to do. The phone buzzed again, a text this time. Clara. "You okay, Grandpa?" I did not sit down. I tapped back with my thumb. "Getting there." The words looked right on the screen, not a performance, a status. I placed the phone face down and poured. The first inhale of coffee lifted something in my chest I had been carrying since the night before last. Heat opened a door inside me and did not ask for permission. I leaned against the counter and let the mug warm my palms. The clock in the hall kept its patient count, and my breath settled into its rhythm. The house felt taller. Places widen when you choose them. I drank and listened to the water settle in the pipes and the faint tick of cooling metal where the kettle had done its work. The air moved through the curtains and gave the room a small bow. Outside, a branch scraped the window with a sound like careful writing. The second buzz came gently. No demand in it, just a presence. Clara again. "Do you want to talk, or should I swing by later?" I looked at the binder on the table and the envelope from the bank, and then I looked at the mug. I wrote back, "Call if you have 5 minutes." The phone answered before I set it down. Grandpa. I could hear her trying not to hurry me. I told her I had coffee, the house was calm, and the morning had done me the favor of being ordinary. She breathed out and let a smile come through the line. "Tell me what ordinary looks like at your place." I described the light on the floor, the steam that still curled from the mug, the way the window glass held a faint echo of the street. She let me finish. Then she said she had seen Melissa's face at the party when I walked out, and it had scared her a little because it looked like a person who had forgotten where the edge of things should be. I could hear myself not rushing to answer. When you stop rushing people, sometimes they tell you the truth they did not know they had. I told her I had corrected what I could. The accounts that were not clean are clean now. The vague papers are clear. I am not announcing to anyone. I am just setting a level and letting the cabinet door close like it should. She went quiet for a heartbeat. I could tell she was squinting a little the way she does when she is thinking. "Do you need me to come by today?" I said I wanted that soon, but not this morning. There is a valuable hour between doing the right thing and turning it into a story. She laughed a small laugh that had relief in it. "You sound like yourself." I said I had missed that sound. Clara said Melissa had been calling her since last night and that she had not picked up yet because she did not know how to answer without making a worse shape out of it. I told her she did not owe anyone a speech. She owed the situation one clear boundary at a time. She repeated the word boundary like she was tasting it. Then she told me something that sat down hard in both our chests. "Mom keeps thinking this is a misunderstanding. She says you will calm down and come over for dinner and we can pretend this did not happen." I took another sip and let the heat carry my answer. I said pretending is how we got here. We moved to smaller things for a few minutes. Work at the library, a plant she is trying to keep alive on the windowsill. The old man who comes in every Thursday and asks for books about trains, even though he never checks them out. I listened to her describe the way he runs a finger along the spines. It made me remember the shop, how I used to slide tools back into their outlines in the drawer, satisfied by the soft click that says, "A thing has returned to itself." Clara asked if there was anything I wanted her to do. I told her I would write a note with where I put the folder and what number to call if the folder ever needs to leave its drawer. Not because I am worried, because clarity is a kindness. She said it was a good kind of grown-up thing, and that she felt better knowing we were in the same chapter. Then she asked if I was sleeping. I told her I slept better than I had in months. the kind of sleep that comes when you finally stop holding your breath. We said we would see each other soon. No pressure threaded through it. I liked that. After the line went quiet, I did not check for new messages. I stood at the sink and rinsed the mug as if that was the only job I had today. The water ran warm over my fingers and the smell of coffee rose out of the porcelain like a small weather system. I dried the cup and set it upside down. The kitchen agreed. I moved through the rooms without list-making. The rug in the hallway tried to lift its corner again, and I pressed it flat with my foot. The chair by the window still held the small dent from last night. I straightened the cushion and left it alone. Not everything needs fixing. Some things only need to be noticed. The phone buzzed once more and stopped. Melissa. I could imagine the texts lining up in neat squares. I did not need to read them to know the shape. Concern that feels like a court order. Offers to help that change the definition when they meet a spine. The part of me that wants to keep peace reached for the device out of habit. The part of me that has to live in this body lifted my hand away. There is room between reaction and response if you make some. I opened the back door to let the air come through. The screen held back a moth that would have burned itself on the lamp if it could. A neighbor's radio drifted in a few bars of something lazy. The curtains moved slow and then still. I stood there and let the house explain itself. It said nothing complicated. Stay, make lunch later. Walk down to the corner and buy a lemon for the fish. Remember the bench that faces the park. You like that bench. Before I left, I took a note card from the drawer and wrote a few lines in plain print. The folder lives in the bedroom top drawer right side. If needed, call Mr. Adler first. If he does not answer, leave one message. Do not call twice. There is power in letting things be seen and then putting them away. I propped the card against the binder for an hour to dry the ink and then slid it into the folder. My name on the tab looked like it belonged there more today than yesterday. On the sidewalk, the day had warmed by a half step. Small sounds reached me from places I could not see. A dog barked and then decided it was not worth it. A delivery driver sang a line of a song and forgot the rest. The grocery on the corner smelled like citrus and cardboard. I took a lemon and paid with cash because a lemon deserves that simplicity. The clerk handed me change and nodded as if we had agreed on something useful. Back home, I set the lemon by the sink and turned the kettle on again. The framed photo by the fridge caught the light in a way that hid the faces and showed only the outline of arms around shoulders. It made the memory kinder. Some days need that. The phone rested where I had left it. I turned it over for the first time since the call. A stack of messages from Melissa waited in their tidy row. Are you home? We should talk. Let me make dinner. This is getting out of hand. The last one read, call me right now. I placed the phone back down. Silence is not neglect. It is sometimes the only way to let noise discover that it is not necessary. The kettle reached its boiling point and I cut the flame before it could boil over. The scent of coffee lifted again and met the clean acid of the lemon. I stood in the doorway while the curtains moved and the lamp over the table softened. The house shrank to the size of its own heartbeat. Outside, the wind let go of the branches. Inside, I switched off the overhead light and watched the room hold its shape without help. Rest is a decision. People think it is what happens when there is nothing left to do. I have learned it is what you do. So the next right thing is not done by a tired hand. I poured. I did not add sugar. I lifted the mug and felt the heat speak through the ceramic. The phone sat quietly. The day went on without me forcing it into a story. I breathed until my breath sounded like part of the clock. Then I let the room go dim and let the window keep the last of the light. She stood on my porch with a foil-covered dish and the same smile she used to win arguments. The afternoon held its breath the way it does before a storm chooses its road. I did not reach for the handle. I let the knock finish its echo in the hallway and then opened the door as far as my shoulder. Hi, Dad, she said, voice smooth, hands already offering the pan like a piece she could measure. I kept my eyes on her face. I did not take the dish. The heat of it still came through the foil. It smelled like the kind of generosity that expects receipts. We need to talk, she said. Her gaze moved past me into the house as if the room would remember how to make space for her on command. I kept my place. About Sunday, she added. About everything. I lifted my hand, and the motion asked her to slow down. The kettle is off, the house is quiet. If you have 1 point, make it. She tried a lighter tone. I brought you dinner. There is plenty. I answered with a small nod that did not mean yes. A car rolled by, and the sound of its tires turned the air for a second. She shifted the pan to the other hand and set her foot on the threshold as if the porch were a courtroom and the wood under her heel was a closing argument. You cut me out of everything. She said it like a verdict she had decided to deliver whether the judge showed up or not. I let the words sit between us. Then I answered even and true. I cut you out of what you already walked away from. Her jaw tightened. She looked past my shoulder again, and this time her eyes found the table where the binder rested under a small square of afternoon light. Her voice gained that quick edge I know from years of hearing her manage rooms. I need to know what you did at the bank. I need to know what you signed. This is not how families operate. You cannot just decide. I kept my hand against the door and did not move my feet. The family does not have a ledger. It has a kitchen. It has a set of keys and a question before a decision. You stopped asking. I started answering for myself. That is the part you do not like. She took a breath the way people do when they feel a script slipping. I am not the villain, Dad. I was keeping things in order. Bills, appointments, logistics. You know I am better at details. My reply did not raise its voice. Order is not ownership. Help is not authority. And ease is not the same as consent. Her smile went flat. She held up the foil dish again as if to refresh the plea. Dinner. You should eat. My hands stayed where they were. I already did. She blinked, recalculating. Earlier you said 1 point. My point is simple, I said. We are done negotiating family. She frowned like I had used a word from a language she had not planned on hearing. What is that supposed to mean? It means there will be no more budget meetings dressed up as Sunday. No more access that arrives as a favor. No more decisions made because easier sounds like mercy. I decide what belongs to me. I decide where it goes when I am finished with it. If you want a conversation, we can have one. If you want control, you will have to find it somewhere else. The pan sagged in her hands. For a second, I saw the little girl who used to carry too many books at once because she did not like making 2 trips. Then the adult returned with a crispness that could cut. You think Clara understands money better than I do. She spends half her check on plants and secondhand sweaters. She will be taken advantage of. She needs me. My answer came without anger. She needs a grandfather who trusts her. She needs a woman who asks, not orders. She needs to learn with chances that are hers, not with permission she has to earn. Melissa shook her head and let out a sound that did not match the air. You are punishing me. I said I am correcting the record. She reached for another angle. At least tell me how much you moved. I am not asking for everything. I am asking to be informed. Your wording has not changed in 10 years, I said. When you say informed, you mean in charge. When you say help, you mean permission. That may work on a spreadsheet. It does not work on me. For a heartbeat, her eyes softened. Then the shield came back. You are making a mistake. People your age get scammed. What happens when you press the wrong button? I nodded once. If I press the wrong button, I will own it. Owning is different from being overridden. The afternoon shifted on its hinge. A breeze came down the block, brushed the porch, and lifted the corner of the foil. She steadied it with a fingertip, then looked at the pan as if it had failed her. Can I at least bring this in? I stepped half a pace to the side and opened the door a fraction more without stepping away from it. The opening was a matter of courtesy, not surrender. If you bring it in, it becomes a conversation we are not ready to have. Keep it as a reminder that not everything offered needs a home. She pulled the dish back to her chest and stared at me over the shimmer of heat. She spoke more slowly now. You are choosing to shut me out. I let my hand drop from the door and rested it along the frame. I am choosing to leave a door open without letting the wrong person decide where it leads. She looked past me one more time. Her gaze landed on the chair by the window and the dent in the cushion I had left there. A man sat there last night who did not yell, she said, but he decided something. I said that he did. She swallowed and tried one last move. Then tell me what I am supposed to do next. The voice had an honest tremble in it, the smallest taste of humility I have heard from her in a long while. Ask, I said, not for access, for a coffee, for a walk, for a story that does not end in a plan, and listen when the answer is no. Her eyes shone and then shuddered. She shifted the dish again and stepped back off the threshold. Fine, she said in the tone that has followed her since grade school when someone did not want her help. This is not over. I said it can be quieter. She stared at the wood between us as if it had moved into her lane. Then she adjusted the angle of the pan, turned on her heel, and walked down the steps without looking back. The foil winked sunlight like a signal you see and decide not to decode. I watched her reach the sidewalk and become part of the street the way all people do when they are no longer inside your house. She did not stumble. The dish kept its heat. I stood there a moment longer with my hand resting on the edge of the door. The frame felt smooth from years of hands that meant love even when they did not manage to show it. I drew the door inward until the latch met the strike plate and made that clean sound a carpenter hopes for. I did not turn the lock. Some boundaries are stronger when they are chosen, not enforced. Inside the hallway held its shape. The air found its level again. The clock down the hall picked up right where it had left off, and the house breathed like it had been waiting to exhale. I walked back to the table and set my palm on the folder without opening it. I did not need paper to tell me what had just happened. The room was larger by an inch. The silence was the kind you earn. I went to the sink and ran a little water, not because there were dishes, but because I liked the sound of a faucet returning to true after a short rest. The window let in a block of light that traveled across the counter and stopped at the cutting board. I stood in it. The smell of coffee still lingered near the kettle. Outside, a bicycle bell rang and then faded down the block. I thought of locking the door and then letting the thought pass. Mercy does not need a bolt. It needs a man who can choose to close a door and still hope for a better knock someday. I reached to turn off the lamp in the corner, and the room gave me back my reflection in the darkened glass. My shoulders were where they belong. My name was where it should be, and the house had kept its promise to remember me. Clara brought onions and bread, the kind of peace offerings you can smell. She stood in the doorway with her hair pushed back and the city still on her cheeks. I waved her in, and the house took her without fuss. She set the paper bag on the counter, and we let the moment breathe before we went looking for what it was supposed to be. I cleared the cutting board, and she rolled up her sleeves. The onions were small and honest. Their skins crackled like old paper and left a gold whisper on our fingers. I handed her the knife that knows my hand and watched her find its balance. She asked about the day, and I said it had been ordinary, in the best way, coffee in the morning and a walk to the corner. She smiled, like that answer mattered. We worked without chatter. She peeled. I rinsed. The pot took a lake of water and a small inland sea of patience. Butter met the bottom and melted into a quiet that welcomed what came next. Onions hit the heat and sweetened against their own will. She laughed when her eyes stung and held a dish towel to her face, then kept going. I told her she would learn the trick of turning her head at the last second. She said she would rather learn how to do hard things while it still mattered. We tore the bread into uneven pieces. The kitchen smelled like the part of winter that invites you in. The windows fogged at the edges, and the old paint on the sill woke up a little. She told me about the regulars at the library who have made peace with the quiet. There is a man who pretends to read philosophy and sleeps sitting up in a chair by the window. There is a woman who writes recipes in the margins of gardening books as if she cannot help herself. I listened and nodded. She has a way of talking that lets a room keep its shape. When the onions softened, we added broth and let the simmer set its own terms. I pulled thyme from the jar and crushed it with my fingers so the oil would say hello. Clara leaned back against the counter and watched the surface of the pot flicker. It is a strange comfort to do something that cannot be sped up. The calendar on the fridge leaned in and did not argue. She asked if the folder on the table was the one I had mentioned. I said it was. She traced the edge with a fingertip and did not open it, the kind of respect that tells you more than questions do. I turned the flame down and lifted the pot with both hands. The whole room moved toward the bowl as if we were adjusting a picture on the wall. We sat at the table, and the soup put its shoulder to us. Steam met our faces and did not ask for permission to be kind. Clara dipped bread into the bowl and let it sink. The first spoonful changed the way we were holding ourselves. She closed her eyes and then opened them slowly. I watched her breathe. She asked the question I knew had been walking around the room since she arrived. Do you ever regret it? The words hung there without accusation. I took a breath and let it land where it needed to land. Only when I mistake sacrifice for love. She looked at me and then at the bowl and then at me again. She did not reach for an argument. She nodded once and the nod carried years. We ate for a while without doing anything else. Spoons, bread, the quiet sound of two people not trying to fix each other. When the bowls were mostly empty, I stood and walked to the shelf where the records live. The sleeve I wanted had been waiting for another decade. I slid it out and let the cardboard brush my palm. The turntable took the vinyl like it had been practicing. The first crackle stitched the room together. Then came that voice, low and certain, as if the speaker had fallen in love with her own breath and forgiven it for being human. The notes found the corners, lifted the curtain an inch, and set the clock to a different kind of counting. Clara leaned back and closed her eyes. She said she could feel the music in her wrists, small pulses like a reminder that the body knows how to keep time, even when the mind forgets. We did not talk over it. We let it move around us, a careful animal that belonged to both of us, for as long as the needle stayed true. When the side finished, I turned the record without a word. She watched my hands work the lever and the arm. A simple ritual can make a house feel lived in. I let the next track bloom before I spoke. I told her where the folder will live and what to do if someone asks for it who should not. Bedroom top drawer right side. Call Mr. Adler first. If he does not pick up, leave one message. Do not chase. She repeated the points back to me without notes. Then she asked if I was sure. I said, this is trust, not theater. If something happens to me, you will need to know where to put your hand. Better to learn it here with soup on the table and music in the air. She reached across the table and rested her fingers against the folder for a second. Not holding. A touch like brackets. She said she felt the weight of it and it did not scare her. She said she was tired of feeling like a visitor in stories that carry her last name. I told her she would not be a visitor here. We washed the bowls together at the sink, the movement choreographed by the years of being decent to rooms. She rinsed while I dried. We did not leave the dishes on the counter to prove a point. We did the small work because small work adds up to peaceful days. She dried her hands on the towel and looked around like she was checking if anything was missing and found nothing out of place. She asked quietly if I wanted her to stay a little longer. I said she could if she wanted to hear one more track. We sat again, and I turned the knob until the speaker gave us enough sound to fill the room without making the walls lean. The voice came back with a sadness that did not beg for attention. She hummed along under her breath. The light shifted on the wall slowly, a pale ribbon across the paint. When the song ended, we let the silence ride on its shoulders for a moment. Clara stood and found her coat on the back of the chair. She smiled in that way that does not flip every card. She said it was good to sit and do nothing important. I said this was the important part. She laughed under her breath and shook her head at me with more love than argument. At the door, she hugged me in a way that told me she had learned to hold people without using them as answers. She stepped back and promised to text when she got home. I told her not to text while walking. She rolled her eyes the way she used to as a teenager, and it made the air lighter. The street outside had picked up its evening wind. She tucked her scarf and went down the steps and turned once to wave. I lifted my hand and the porch light caught on her ring and sent a small signal up the block. When she was gone, I went back to the table and placed the folder where it had been. I did not open it. It was nothing more and nothing less than proof that a man can put his name where it belongs when he is ready. I set the needle back at the beginning of the side and let the room refill with a voice that makes mistakes sound survivable. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the front room and watched the music make a slow map on the wall. The window held a late strip of light and the dust in it moved like tiny swimmers who were not in a hurry. I smiled without meaning to. The house had been waiting for a night like this, not loud, not grand, but dense with the kind of peace you can taste. Later, when people ask me when things turned, I will think of onions and bread and a record playing until the label warmed. And I will say it was that soup night, the one where trust made a home on the table and asked for nothing in return. The windows faced east, and for the first time in years the light chose me. It spilled across the bare floor like a clean sheet, climbed the wall, and found the scuff my new key had made when I first tried the lock with hands that would not stop being careful. The place was small and honest. 2 rooms and a kitchen that did not pretend to be more than a kitchen. The paint was the color of plain decisions. The radiator ticked once, like a man clearing his throat before saying something decent. I stood in the doorway and let the morning touch my face. You can tell if a room intends to keep you by how it handles light. This one knew how to hold it without showing off. I set my bag on the counter and took a slow inventory. A sink that had nothing to explain. Cabinets that would take a brush if I decided they needed a new season. A narrow window above the stove that watched a sliver of fire escape and a wedge of sky. I ran a cloth over the counter and the cloth came back mostly clean. That is as much as you can ask from the beginning. A shuffle sounded in the hall. A cane tipped with rubber stopped at my door and then moved again like a sentence finding its last word. She appeared a moment later with neat gray hair, careful earrings, and a mouth that knew how to laugh and how to withhold it. "You're the new one," she said. I told her I was, and gave her my name. She nodded with the authority of a building that runs on unprinted rules. "I am Mrs. Porter. Do not put trash out before 5. If the super is late, ring twice and then stop. The woman in 2B feeds the squirrels, which is not a crime here. The washing machines take quarters in exactly the patience you think they will." She peered past my shoulder and took in the boxes like she was evaluating a landing. "You divorced?" "No," I said. "Just unadopted by adulthood." She gave me a look that tried not to be a smile and did not quite succeed. "You will do," she said, and tapped the cane twice as if approving a shelf she had just installed. I walked her to the stairs and watched her go down one step at a time without losing a shred of dignity. Then I came back in and opened the window over the sink. The hinge complained in a friendly way. Air moved in carrying the bakery from the corner and a little sun-warmed metal. The room smelled new and possible. I picked up the small radio I had brought from the house and turned the dial until the static resolved into a voice that read the weather like a promise kept. The station drifted to a tune I recognized from a decade I used to keep in a glove compartment. Brass sketched a line across the kitchen and then left me alone. Unpacking went the way good work goes when no one is timing you. Plates to the second shelf where my hands would find them without looking. A short row of spices that had learned patience. A skillet that knows when to listen and when to speak. I placed a lemon on the sill because morning prefers something bright to look at. The bedroom took the bed and gave it back as a place to rest, not a platform for thinking. I slid a small table next to it and set my watch there face up. The bathroom mirror returned a man who looked like he had just stopped holding his breath. A knock came like a polite bird against the frame. I found Mrs. Porter again, leaning in just enough to satisfy curiosity without breaking it. "I brought you a plant," she said, and held up a pot of green that trailed like a sentence that was not finished yet. It is hard to argue with life when it insists on climbing. I set it on the kitchen window, and it immediately tried to catch more sun than was available. We both watched it for a moment. She asked if I used a stove or if I had surrendered to takeout. I said a stove is a friend that tells the truth. "Good," she said. "The building needs that smell now and then." Before she left, she tapped the cane once against the threshold. "Welcome, Mr. Green. May your mornings be wide." When the afternoon stretched itself thin, I went downstairs and walked the block the way people do when they are trying out the neighborhood for fit. The park sat a street over a rectangle of trees that had seen enough to be patient with what is new. Mothers negotiated with toddlers about swings. A woman read a paperback with her finger marking the chapter all the way through. A man worked a chess puzzle one square at a time, satisfied to lose and find the solution alone. I took a bench with a view of the east side where the sun's next day rehearses its entrance. Back upstairs, a thin envelope waited on the floor inside my door, pushed through the slot by hands that knew you do not fold bills that are not yours. The return address made me stop before I picked it up. The name was from a time when my hands had grease in the lines and I believed a radio could hold a Saturday. Tom Rydell. I slit the top with a thumbnail and slid out a single page. He wrote like a man who has learned not to waste words. Heard your name from a guy at the old shop who still talks to machines like they can answer. Said you hung it up on your own terms. Said you used to dance in the break room when the floor wax was fresh and the right song caught your feet. If you are still breathing and they have not taken the music out of you, come down on a Friday night. My niece runs a place that lets men our age be exactly as light as we can handle. It is not for show. It is for remembering what the body knew before it thought too much. I held the paper long enough for the edges to go warm. I had not thought about dancing in years. Not the formal kind. The small movements you make when a horn section sends a signal through your knees. The quick turn you give a room when a drum says yes. My wife had watched me once in our kitchen with a face that made me feel like a foolish king. "You are both ridiculous and alive," she said, and I had bowed because kings should. I set the letter on the counter and leaned back against the sink. The light shifted on the wall and found the plant. It looked back at me with the calm of a thing that wants exactly what it takes to grow. The radio gave me a station identification and then fell into a song with a piano that sounded like old doors opening. I did not try anything fancy. I let my shoulder answer one beat, then the other. My feet moved a quarter inch to remind my knees that they were part of this story too. I did not hurt. I did not hurry. I let the song finish, and then I laughed once softly at how a room can witness a man without judgment. I wrote Tom back before I could second guess it. Told him I was in a new place, that I knew the map of the sun. Said my knees were honest but not cruel. Said I might find my way to his niece's place on a Friday if the street cooperated. I thanked him for remembering the right parts of me and for not trying to sell me the wrong ones. I addressed the envelope and set it by the door so I would not forget to mail it like a promise to my own younger self. Evening brought Mrs. Porter again, this time with a piece of mail in her hand that had landed in the wrong box. She looked around at the first layer of settling I had managed. The plant looked pleased, she said, which is more than most newcomers can claim. I offered her a glass of water, and she accepted on the condition that I not pretend it was a favor. We stood at the counter like neighbors who have decided to make use of it. She asked what brought me here in the way you ask a person if they sleep with the window open. I said I had outgrown a set of rules I did not write. She nodded as if that were a familiar shirt. "The door is different when you open it yourself," she said. We let that be the last sentence, and she left me to the kind of quiet that is not lonely. I turned the radio lower and opened the window wider. Air came in and made a slow curve through the room, lifted a corner of a paper on the counter and left. I took off my shoes and walked the line of light across the floor in my socks the way a child tests a balance beam. I did not wobble. I washed a single plate that I had not had time to dirty but wanted to bless anyway. I put it away, and it fit the shelf as if the shelf had been waiting for it. Night arrived by degrees and did not argue with the clock. I pulled the blind down just enough to keep the city's glare from acting like a guest. The plant on the sill sighed against the glass like someone who had found a bus seat on a day when buses are full. The radiator clicked again and then settled, ready to carry its share of winter. I set my watch on the table and let it stop telling me what to do. Before I slept, I stood in front of the window one more time. The streetlights held their halos, and the storefront signs went to sleep. A man walked his dog, and the leash drew a neat line between intention and obedience. I lifted the latch and let the faint, cool thread of night find the room. The radio hummed under its breath, and a late voice gave the name of a song I had not heard in 20 years. I smiled and let the memory come without making it prove anything. Morning would start here now. The East had made that promise with its first hand on my wall. I had neighbors who understood the value of rules that do not need to be written. I had a letter that remembered me better than I had remembered myself. I had a plant trying to climb and a window that said yes. Age was not a closing. It was a turn. And if I kept the radio low and the window open and the floor clear, I could step into that turn with both feet under me. The apartment exhaled a little, and I answered with my own breath. The light had chosen me. I intended to choose it back. At sunrise, my coffee did not taste like revenge. It tasted like peace. Steam rose in a simple ribbon, and the first light came in clean from the east, laying itself across the small table as if the room and I had agreed to start over without witnesses. I sat with both hands around the mug and let the warmth settle my breathing. The plant on the sill tilted toward the morning, as if it had known all along which way to face. The building woke the way honest places do. A pipe found its voice and quieted. A door down the hall closed with care. Somewhere below, a radio offered 2 bars of something old, and then remembered to be shy. The smell of smoked meat still lingered on an old towel I had brought here by habit. It no longer asked for attention. It just reminded me I had done a hard thing and come through. I took small sips and watched the light walk across the wood grain. There is a moment when a day decides whether to carry yesterday's noise. Today did not. I rinsed the cup and set it back on the table because that is where it belongs at this hour. The window gave me a strip of sky the color of a promise kept. I stood in it a while, and then the soft scrape at my door let me know the world still had business with me. An envelope lay on the floor just inside the threshold. The handwriting on the front was careful and practiced the kind that wins approval at school and then tries to keep winning it forever. I carried it to the table and opened it with a steady thumb. The card inside was tasteful and distant. Let us start fresh. Dinner. Just us. Love, Melissa. The words made a square on the paper that did not know how to hold a living thing. I read it once. I let my eyes find each corner, then I set it beneath the edge of the plant pot to keep it from curling. I did not write back. I did not plan what I would say if I did. There is a difference between silence that hides and silence that heals. This was the kind that lets a room finish a thought. The phone rested face down beside the radio. I did not reach for it. I filled the kettle, turned the flame low, and let the soft rumble measure the time a person needs to be sure. The plant leaned into the glass. Sun warmed my forearms. I breathed in and counted until the numbers stopped mattering. The kettle came to its small voice, and I cut the flame before it could shout. The buzz came as I poured. Melissa. I let it ring through once and then again. On the third, I took the call and held the phone a little away, as if giving it and myself room to act right. Her first words came out tight. "Are you punishing me?" "No," I said, and made sure the air around the sentence stayed kind. "I am just living my turn." She waited as if expecting the rest of the paragraph that used to follow when I softened. There was no paragraph. Only the little sounds a phone makes when two people are finally telling the truth. She said we could set everything back where it was. We could begin again, and no one would have to be embarrassed. I told her that beginnings do not happen on command, and that embarrassment is not the worst outcome when people learn where they end and someone else begins. She said I was being dramatic. I told her I was being exact. She asked if there was anything she could do. I said yes, ask for coffee on a day when we are both willing to hear no. Then I wished her a good morning and let the line close without force. The room did not change shape. That is the point. I put the phone back on the table, and the quiet landed like a familiar coat across my shoulders. The card under the plant stayed put. The kettle cooled and clicked once like a small agreement. I turned on the radio and eased the dial until the static gave way to a voice I knew by its first breath. The needle settled. A soft crackle stitched the air together, and then the song arrived without asking for applause. The singer did not plead. She told the truth to the room and let the room decide what to do with it. I leaned in the doorway between the kitchen and the front room and let the music lift one shoulder and then the other. Not dancing, not stillness, just a body remembering it has permission to be where it is. The light climbed another inch and found the edge of the plant pot and the crease in the card and the line of my cup. Morning held its ground. I made oatmeal on the stove and did not rush. A little salt, a little patience. I stood while it thickened and listened to the radiator give the kind of warmth that does not brag. The spoon left a small circle in the bowl, and then a smaller one. I sat and ate without a screen, without a plan, and without trying to prove anything to anyone. The taste was plain in the way plain is a relief after you have spent too long asking permission to eat. When the bowl was clean, I rinsed it and left it to dry. The window gave me the sound of the street assembling itself. A truck rolled past with a practiced sigh. A laugh came from the sidewalk and did not ask to be explained. I could have called Clara right then and told her the day was soft and honest. I waited. Some good news deserves to rest before it becomes a message. I wrote a short line on a card and slid it into the folder where a life keeps its proof, not a revision. A note that says where to find the spare key and the name of the neighbor who will knock once and wait. I tucked the folder back in its place and closed the drawer only when it felt like the room could carry on without remembering where it went. The plant observed everything and kept growing. I opened the window a little more and let the morning come in. The music moved across the wall and left a faint map of air on the paint. I put my hand in the light and turned it palm up. The lines there looked like what they have always looked like, work and care and the small breaks that never quite showed. I did not hide them. I did not ask them to tell me more than they have. The phone stayed quiet. I made another cup and watched the steam cross the same square of sunlight it had crossed an hour earlier. It felt different and also the same. I thought about the word fair and how it had worn me out for years. Today the word did not matter. Order mattered. A simple order where a man gets to sit at his own table and choose his own morning without having to plead his case. The record side ended, and for a breath, the room simply held. I turned the vinyl with care and let the crackle come back. I did not need the singer to promise anything, just sing. The new track began and lifted the edge of the day another fraction. I smiled at nothing and at everything. I thought of the bench at the park and the bakery on the corner and the letter I would mail to an old friend before Friday came around. Small plans, the kind that do not require anyone's blessing. I looked once at the card under the plant and considered moving it to the drawer. Not yet. There is value in letting evidence sit in the sun until it understands it is not in charge. I poured the rest of the kettle into the sink and watched steam become nothing you can hold. I wiped the counter with the towel that still remembered smoke and then hung it where air could finish the work. When the hour finally felt complete, I sent Clara 2 words. Good morning. She answered with a heart and the promise of a visit when the light was right. That was enough. I left the phone where it lay and stepped to the window to take the day the way it was offered. Justice arrived without a witness list. No gavel, no speech, just a room that kept its promise and a cup that cooled in my hand while the sun made a steady case across the table. I stood there until the record clicked at the center and the needle stayed a moment on nothing, the soft crackle holding. Then I lifted the arm, let the silence settle, and breathed the kind of breath that does not ask for praise. The morning had chosen me. I chose it back. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.